I joked that my ex's sister was practically my wife. She looked at me and asked, "What's stopping us?" The joke came out before I could stop it. We were in her kitchen at 9 on a Saturday morning. She was making eggs for the third weekend in a row, while I sat at her counter reading her mail by accident, because it looked like mine, and I said it the way you say something you've been not saying for too long. At this point, Nadia, you're basically my wife. She set the spatula down. She turned around. And she looked at me the way a person looks when they've already rehearsed this moment, already decided what to do with it. And she asked, very quietly, "What's stopping us?" The eggs burned. Neither of us moved to save them. Her name is Nadia Osei. 31. Landscape architect. The younger sister of the woman I dated for 2 years and lost badly enough that I spent 3 months wondering what I'd done wrong before I understood that the answer was nothing. That Elena and I had simply been two reasonable people who wanted different lives and had been too polite to say so until it was too late. Elena was brilliant and restless and constitutionally unsuited to staying still. She left for a residency in Amsterdam 14 months ago. We ended things on the phone. We said all the right words. I don't think either of us cried, which told me more about what we'd actually had than anything we'd said in 2 years. Nadia and I had been close the whole time. That was the part I hadn't known what to do with. She was already my neighbor, had moved into the building 6 months before I even met Elena, a coincidence that became a complication, that became, slowly, the most solid thing in my life. We shared a wall and a landing and a habit of leaving each other's doors slightly open on weekend mornings, the way people do when they've stopped bothering with formality. I knew her routines. She knew mine. When the pipes in my unit flooded in January, I slept on her couch for 11 days, and she never once made me feel like a problem to be managed. When her mother got sick last spring, she sat in my kitchen at 2 in the morning, and I made tea neither of us drank, and she talked until she ran out of words, and I stayed until she fell asleep in the chair. We called all of this friendship. We called it neighborly. We called it the natural closeness of people who had been through a mutual chapter. We did not call it what it had been becoming for at least the last 8 months, which was something that had no clean name and lived just past the edge of every conversation we almost had. And now the eggs were burning, and she was looking at me, and I had no answer. "Nadia," I said, "Elena is your sister." "I know who Elena is," she said. "She's your family." "She's my family," Nadia agreed. "She's also in Amsterdam. She has been for 14 months. And she called me 3 weeks ago." A pause. "She asked about you." Something shifted in my chest. "What did she say?" "She asked if you were okay, if you were seeing anyone." Nadia turned back to the stove, moved the pan off the heat. The eggs were beyond rescue. "I told her you were fine, that you were around." She set the pan in the sink. She said, and I'm giving you this exactly. She said, "He's probably in love with you by now. He always liked you better anyway." The room went very quiet. I said, "She said that?" Word for word. Nadia turned back. "Which is why I need you to answer the question I asked, instead of handing me back every reason not to." My phone was on the counter between us. Not ringing, just there, the way an object becomes significant when a room gets too still. "You understand what you're asking would change everything," I said. "Everything has already changed," she said. "We're just the last ones to say it out loud." And she was right. She had been right for longer than I wanted to admit. But to understand why, you have to go back to the actual beginning. Not to the joke in the kitchen, not even to Elena, but to the first morning I understood that the person I was most myself around was not the woman I was dating. It was a Sunday in late October, 2 years ago. Elena was traveling. She traveled constantly. which I had told myself was something I admired, and not something that was slowly confirming a mismatch. I had a leak under my kitchen sink and no tools, and too much pride to call a plumber for something that small. And Nadia knocked on my door at 10 in the morning with a wrench and no explanation, because she had heard the dripping through the wall and had apparently just decided to handle it. She was under my sink for 40 minutes. She fixed it. She refused the $20 I offered. She accepted the coffee I made and stayed for 3 hours. We talked about everything that morning in the way you talk when you're not trying to impress anyone. About her work, which she described not as designing outdoor spaces, but as arguing with the land about what it wants to become. A phrase I have thought about regularly ever since. About my work as a structural engineer, which she engaged with seriously, asked questions about that no one else had thought to ask. About our families, our childhoods. The particular texture of growing up as the child who was always watching the room instead of performing for it. At some point I realized we had been talking for 3 hours, and I hadn't once checked my phone or wondered when Alina was coming home. I noticed that. I filed it under nothing and left it there. Alina and I lasted another 4 months after that Sunday. They were fine months, genuinely. No drama, no rupture, no specific moment where anything broke. Just the long, slow accumulation of two people being good to each other in ways that weren't quite enough. Two people being careful with each other the way you're careful with something you've already half decided to put down. When Amsterdam came up, a 2-year residency at a firm she had wanted to work with for her entire career, I knew before she finished the sentence that I was going to tell her to go. And I knew the reason I was going to tell her to go was not entirely selfless. She went. We ended it. I spent 3 months being fine in the specific way that means you're not letting yourself ask the right questions. The right question was on the other side of my wall, making coffee every morning at 7:15, whose alarm I had memorized without meaning to, whose laugh I could identify through the shared drywall, who left a spare key under my mat when I came home from my father's funeral and didn't say anything about it until 2 days later when I found it, and she just shrugged and said she figured I might need it, and I stood in the hallway for a moment holding a small brass key and understanding something I had no idea what to do with. Over the following 8 months, we built a life that belonged entirely to us, without discussing it, without naming what we were doing. Saturday breakfasts became a standing event. Tuesday evenings became a standing event. When she had a project presentation that frightened her, a major public space commission, the biggest of her career, she walked through the entire pitch in my living room the night before, and I sat on the couch asking questions the way a skeptical city council member would, and she answered every one, and at the end she looked at me and said, "Okay, I can do this." And she did. And when it was approved, she texted me before she texted anyone else. When I had a structural issue on a project that was keeping me awake, a load-bearing miscalculation found late in construction, the kind of thing that can end a career if mishandled, I walked into her kitchen at midnight, and she sat down and said, "Tell me everything." And she listened with the focused patience of someone who does not need to understand every technical detail to understand what matters, which was that I was frightened and needed to think out loud. By 2 in the morning, I had the solution. She had not given it to me. She had simply provided the conditions under which I could find it myself. I don't know what to call that except essential. But underneath everything that was growing between us, there was a problem that neither of us had touched. Alina. Not Alina as a rival or a complication, but Alina as a fact. A living person with a relationship to both of us that could not be reorganized without her consent. without a conversation that would require honesty about things neither Nadia nor I had been willing to name out loud, even to ourselves. I could feel Nadia navigating it. The precise way she maintained a just enough distance, the way she would occasionally pull back from a moment that was about to become something else, the way she mentioned Elena not to remind me, but to remind herself. She was not a person who operated without integrity, and neither was I, and the thing between us had been living in the gap between what we felt and what we thought we were allowed to do about it. Until a Saturday morning in her kitchen with burned eggs and a question on the table that finally had nowhere left to go. 3 weeks after Alana's phone call, the one where she said I was probably in love with Nadia by now, the one that had apparently given Nadia permission she'd been waiting for, I was standing in Nadia's kitchen, and she was standing 4 feet away, looking at me with the patience of a person who has made a decision and is giving you the space to catch up. "She called you," I said. "She called me." And she said that. She said exactly that. I needed to hear it from Elena. I needed it to be real and not something I was building in my head because I wanted it to be true. "I have to call her," I said. Nadia nodded. "I know. I expected that." She picked up a dish towel, folded it. "Use my room if you want. Take as long as you need." I called Elena from Nadia's bedroom, sitting on the edge of her bed surrounded by the particular evidence of her daily life. Drafting pencils on the nightstand, a trail map pinned above the desk, a photograph of her and her mother at a job site, both of them in hard hats, both laughing. I held the phone and it rang twice, and Alana picked up and said, "I was wondering when you'd call." "Nadia told you she was going to ask me," I said. "Nadia told me she was thinking about it. There's a difference." A pause. "Are you okay?" "I don't know yet." "Okay." Another pause, longer, Marcus. "Can I say something, and have you actually listened to it? Not argue with it?" "Yes, I ended us," Elena said. "Not because anything was wrong. You were good to me. I was good to you. It just wasn't. It wasn't the thing that makes you not want to go to Amsterdam. You know what I mean?" I knew what she meant, and I watched you and Nadia for 2 years. I'm her sister. I'm not blind. And I'm not hurt by it. I want to be very clear about that. I think the correct feeling is something more like relief that both of you might stop being ridiculous. I made a sound that was not quite a laugh. "She's been careful about you for a long time," Elena said. "Because of me. Because she didn't want to be the person who did that to her sister. And I'm telling both of you, that you are not doing anything to me. You would be doing something for her. And honestly, for yourself. A beat. Don't waste it, because you're being honorable about something that doesn't require it anymore." I sat for a moment on the edge of Nadia's bed, with her drafting pencils on the nightstand, and the map of a trail I had not yet walked, and the photograph of her laughing in a hard hat, and I felt the particular sensation of a problem I had been managing for a long time quietly stop being a problem. I went back to the kitchen. Nadia was at the counter, making new eggs. Not performing casualness, actually making eggs, with the focused attention she gives to anything she decides to do correctly. She heard me come in and didn't turn around immediately, giving me the space to arrive on my own terms. That was exactly like her. That was so precisely like her that I stood in the doorway for a moment just holding it. She said, "Don't waste it," I said. Nadia set the spatula down. She turned around. She would say that. She also said, "You've been careful about me for a long time." "I have been," she said. "I thought it was the right thing." "It was," I said. "It was the right thing for as long as it needed to be. And it doesn't need to be anymore." She looked at me with an expression I want to try to describe accurately. It was not relief, exactly. Or not only relief. It was the look of someone who has been holding something at a careful distance for long enough that being allowed to put it down feels almost physical. A kind of easing in the body, a small exhale, the shoulders settling. "Okay," she said. "So what do we do?" I said, "we start with the eggs." She smiled. It was not a performance of a smile. It was the real one, the one I'd been noticing for 2 years without letting myself think about it too directly. "And after the eggs?" "After the eggs," I said, "we figure out what to call this." "We could call it what it is," she said. "What is it?" She picked up the spatula. Two people who spent 2 years being very careful and very correct and finally ran out of reasons to keep doing that. A pause. Also eggs, I said. We had breakfast. We did not rush into anything. We were, both of us, people who had spent enough time being careful that we carried it as a habit. And the first weeks of whatever we were becoming were quiet and close and full of the same rhythms we already had. Saturday mornings, Tuesday evenings, her drafting pencils on the nightstand, my spare key under her mat. The difference was that we stopped pretending these things were ordinary. The difference was that I stopped walking back to my own apartment at the end of the night as if I were required to. Elena called Nadia the following week. I was not on that call. Nadia told me afterward that it was 40 minutes, and she cried once, and Alana said something that made her laugh out loud, and at the end, Alana said she expected to be invited to the wedding, and Nadia said she'd think about it, and Alana said that was as close to a yes as Nadia ever got. 4 months after the eggs. Her commission, the major public space project, the biggest of her career, broke ground last Thursday. I was on the site. She didn't ask me to come. She just told me when it was. The way you tell someone something because you assume they already know where they're supposed to be. I stood on the edge of the site and watched her walk the ground with the construction foreman, pointing out elevations, gesturing at sight lines, doing the things she had described as arguing with the land about what it wants to become. She was in her hard hat. She looked like the photograph on her nightstand, focused and alive in the particular way she is when she is doing the thing she was made to do. She looked up and saw me. She did not wave. She just looked. The way you look at something that belongs in the place it's standing. And then she went back to the argument with the land. I have not told her how much I carry that look. I think she already knows. Last week, she left a letter on my counter while I was in the shower. Not a long letter. 4 sentences. The last one said, "I have been in love with you since the Sunday you let me fix your pipes without making a big deal of it. I'm glad we finally stopped being so careful." She did not sign it. She didn't need to. I have it on my nightstand. I think about the word finally. About all the time that felt like waiting and was actually preparation. All the mornings we built without knowing we were building. All the careful distances that turned out to be the exact right distance to cross at the exact right time. I think about Elena saying, "Don't waste it." I don't intend to. Have you ever been the most careful version of yourself around someone? The most considered, the most precise, the most determined not to want what you wanted, and eventually run completely out of reasons to keep being that careful? Tell us about the moment you finally stopped pretending the distance was necessary. We read every one. Subscribe if you stayed to the end. There are more of these stories, and every one of them is true in the ways that matter.